The catering staff had mistaken Nate Calloway for one of their own 3 times that night, and he had stopped correcting them after the second. He was crouched in the corner of the Hale family ballroom in his clean work shirt, driving a small clamp onto the split rail of an antique chair someone had backed into, because a broken chair in a room like this bothered him more than the room did. That was when Vivian Hale crossed all that marble in a gown the color of deep water and stopped in front of him. "Nate," she said, low and fast, like a woman who had rehearsed the sentence in the car and still hated it. "I need you to do something impossible." He tightened the clamp a quarter turn and looked up. "I fix impossible for a living. Just pretend to be my fiancé for one dinner. You wear a ring, you hold my chair, and by midnight we are strangers again." Down the long hall behind her, a man's polished voice was already rising over the string music, saying her name like he owned it. Her jaw set. "Please, one dinner." Nate set the chair down on all 4 legs, tested it, found it steady. He stood, and he was taller than she expected, and calmer. He looked at her a long moment, at the fear she was hiding under the poise. "I will sit at that table," he said, "on one condition." The little circle of catering staff nearby had gone still, trays forgotten. Vivian's breath caught. Whatever she had braced for, it was not a man setting terms. "Before you keep going, guess what one condition a man like that names when a woman like that finally needs him? Some answers you will not see coming." 7 weeks earlier, Nate Calloway had never set foot in a room that expensive. His actual world was a low cinder-block workshop on the edge of a river town, 12 feet wide and smelling of shellac and cut oak, with 1 good window and a radio that only got 2 stations. Nate got there at 5:30 most mornings, before the town woke, because the quiet hours were the honest ones. On the morning our story really begins, he was cutting dovetails by hand for a set of estate cabinets, marking each tail with a pencil and a bevel gauge, sawing just outside the line the way his old teacher had drilled into him 30 years back. The door banged. Walt Brennan came in sideways, carrying 2 coffees and the cold air. Walt was 67, mostly retired, and constitutionally unable to stay away from a shop with a job running. The Hales know they have got the best joiner in 3 counties bidding on their scraps. Walt set a coffee by the vise, careful of the tools. "They know I am cheap," Nate said, not looking up from the saw. "That is all they need to know. That is all you let them know." Walt picked up a finished drawer, turned it over, ran a thumb along a joint so tight it did not need glue. "Nobody cuts these anymore. You could charge triple and work half as hard." "I could." Nate blew pencil dust off the board. "Then I would be doing somebody else's work in some other town, and Ivy would be eating supper with the sitter." That name closed the argument, the way it always did. Walt sipped his coffee and started sweeping, because a man could not just stand in a working shop. "You know old Mrs. Pruitt called me last week," Walt said over the broom. "Asking after you. Said the museum in the city had a man look at her sideboard, the one you did in the spring, and he did not believe a living person cut those joints. Wanted to know who your master was." Walt grinned. "I told her the poor fella never had one, taught himself out of spite." "You taught me everything I know," Nate said. "I taught you everything I know. You know more than that now, and we both feel it." Walt set the broom down. He was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again, the teasing had gone out of it. "I am serious about the Hales, Nate. That family does not pay a bill they can argue. I have watched them do it to better-funded men than you. Get it in writing, get it signed, get half up front." "It is a big job and a fair contract," Nate said. "They signed. People honor what they sign." Walt looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at someone who is right about wood and wrong about people. "Most people," he said. "Not all." He let it go because you could not tell Nate Calloway that the world was worse than his workmanship. He had to find that out one board at a time. Nate Calloway was 38 years old and looked like exactly what he was, a man who used his hands for a living and did not mind it. He had a daughter named Ivy who was 8, a truck with 200,000 miles on it, and a reputation among the few people who understood woodwork as the finest restoration carpenter left in the county. None of that had ever translated into money, and he had made a peace with it that most men only pretend to make. That evening he made grilled cheese and cut it into triangles because Ivy said squares tasted wrong. Her drawing of the two of them held the center of the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. She was reading a fat library book about a girl who lived in a castle, and she looked up from it with the serious face she used for large questions. "Dad, the big lake house you're fixing, does it have a library, like a whole room?" "A big one, 2 floors of books." Ivy considered this. "Do rich people read the books, or do they just keep them?" Nate laughed, surprised into it. "That," he said, "is a better question than most grown people ask." He kissed the top of her head. "I will find out and report back." "Promise you will actually ask them," Ivy said, suspicious. "Not just say you asked." "I promise I will actually ask them." He held up 2 fingers, their oldest oath. Carpenter's honor. Now, the girl in the castle. Did she find the passage yet? Almost. Ivy hugged the book to her chest. "I am saving the good part for when you have a slow night and can read the whole thing." Nate did not have many slow nights, and she knew it. And that was why the offer meant what it meant. "I am going to hold you to that," he said. "You keep the good part safe. I will make the slow night. Deal?" "Deal." She stuck out her hand, and they shook on it, gravely, and she let him turn out the light. After she was asleep, he set a table leg across the kitchen counter under one lamp and sanded it by hand, moving with the grain, the house quiet around him. It was not overtime. It was just the work, and he loved it, and that was the whole secret nobody in a gown would ever have guessed. He had not always been alone. He did not talk about it, but the shape of it was in everything he did. Grace had been the loud one, the one who laughed in libraries and cried at commercials, and she had died 4 years ago in a spring that Nate could no longer remember in order, only in pieces. She left him a daughter who had her chin and a rocking chair her own grandmother had made, and the rocking chair had broken the winter after the funeral when Nate, carrying too much and sleeping too little, had knocked it down the porch steps. For a long time he could not touch it. Then one night he could, and he spent 3 weeks steaming and clamping and pinning the shattered runner back into one curve, and when it rocked true again he sat in it and did not get up until morning. Grief had not made him bitter. It had made him careful. He had learned to hold a whole home together with the same patience he gave a warped board, a little pressure, a lot of time, and no shortcuts that would show later. That patience had cost him. A furniture house 2 states over had offered him real money that year to run their restoration floor. He had turned it down at the kitchen table with the phone against his ear and Ivy's school calendar on the wall in front of him. "There is work I want," he told the man on the phone. "And there is work I can live with. This one I cannot live with. I have a daughter who needs the same face at pickup every day. I am that face." The man had called him a fool, politely, and hung up. Nate had gone back to sanding. The rocking chair sat in the corner of the front room, mended and gleaming, and he never once considered selling it, no matter how thin a month got. The Hale estate changed the arithmetic of his year, and it changed something else he had not budgeted for. It sat on the good side of the lake, a stone house from another century, with more woodwork than a man could restore in a lifetime, and Nate had won the carpentry contract with a bid so lean that Hale and Sons had signed it without a second meeting. He expected to work unseen, the way he always did. He did not expect Vivian Hale. She was the chief executive of the family firm, 34, and she came to the estate on a Tuesday afternoon while he was on his knees in the library with the ruined table. The table was the reason the whole restoration existed, though nobody had told him so. It was a long partner's library table her grandfather had built his fortune across, walnut with a burl top, and a burst pipe 2 winters back had swollen and cracked it and lifted the veneer in sheets. 3 restorers before Nate had looked at it and quoted a polite number to make it disappear. "Everyone told me it was firewood," Vivian said from the doorway. She had expected to find a laborer. She found a man running his fingertips over a cracked joint the way a doctor reads a wrist for a pulse. "Everyone wanted the easy invoice," Nate said, without turning around. "This is not firewood. This is 110 years of somebody doing it right, and 1 bad winter. The top has to come off, the core has to be stabilized, and the veneer has to be laid back down a board at a time with hot hide glue and a lot of Tuesdays. It is not cheap in hours. It is cheap in respect, and somebody already spent all of that." Vivian, who spent her life in rooms full of people telling her what she wanted to hear, stood very still. "How long?" she said finally. "Done right? Weeks? Done fast?" "Never, because fast is how it got quoted as firewood." She came in. She knew, it turned out, the difference between veneer and solid stock, because her grandfather had taught her before the family decided she was executive material. They ended up on the service porch as the light went orange, drinking bad coffee out of the site thermos, and she stayed 40 minutes longer than a chief executive has to stay anywhere. When his truck finally rattled down the drive, she stood on the porch and realized, with something close to alarm, that she had looked forward to a Tuesday for the first time in a year. She came back the next day with a reason she had manufactured on the way over, a question about the paneling in the East Hall that did not really need her to ask it. Nate answered it anyway, seriously, and showed her how the old carpenters had cut the raised panels to float inside their frames so the wood could breathe through a century of winters without splitting. "You talk about it like it is alive," Vivian said. "It is, a little. That is the whole trick people miss." He tapped the panel. "Wood keeps moving its whole life. You do not fight it. You build it a little room to move in, and then it lasts longer than you do." He glanced at her. "Most durable things work that way. You give them room." Vivian, who had been managed and merged and positioned her entire life, and given room by no one, found she had to look at the paneling for a while before she could answer. She started bringing 2 coffees on the days she came. She told herself it was courtesy. Frances Odell, watching from the office window, could have told her it was not, but Frances Odell had learned young to keep what she saw to herself. "My grandfather taught me the difference between veneer and solid stock when I was 9, Vivian said one afternoon, running her hand along a board on his bench. "Then the family decided I was executive material, and I have not been allowed to touch anything real since. I sign things, I approve things. I have not made one single thing in 15 years. "You could learn again," Nate said. "It is in there, hands remember." "Would you teach me?" He considered it the way he considered everything, without hurry. "If you actually show up," he said. "Half the people who ask do not. The wood knows the difference. Here is a fair place to make a small wager. A woman like Vivian Hale, who has been handed everything and trusted by no one, has just met a man who wants nothing from her. Guess what her family does when they notice? Keep that guess handy. What her family did was send Gerald. Gerald Hale was Vivian's uncle and the acting chairman, 61, Silver and Smooth. A man who had learned that you could take almost anything from almost anyone if you smiled while you did it. He found Nate in the site trailer on a gray afternoon with a ledger open on the folding table. Mr. Calloway, the restoration numbers. Gerald turned the ledger so it faced Nate. We are running over, considerably. I am sure it is nobody's fault. These old houses surprise everyone, but the overage sits at just under $19,000, and the family would like it resolved quietly. Nate looked at the page for a long time. He had billed 40 hours the previous month, at a rate a first-year plumber would sneer at. The ledger said 90. It said materials he had never ordered from a supplier he had never used. It said his name at the bottom of a number he had never written. I billed 40 hours, Nate said. This says 90, I can read. Numbers get entered by a lot of hands. Gerald's smile did not move. The simplest thing, Mr. Calloway, is for a reasonable man to absorb the difference. Sign here and preserve the relationship. There's a great deal of future work in a house like this, for the right sort of quiet partner. It was not a subtle threat, and it was not meant to be. Nate thought about the rent, which was due. He thought about Ivy's field trip form on the kitchen table, and the $22 it asked for, and how he had already set the $22 aside in an envelope by the door. He thought about how easy it would be to sign, and how a man who signs one page like that spends the rest of his life signing pages like that. I will need a copy of this to review, Nate said mildly. That will not be necessary. Then neither will my signature. Nate stood, and he was courteous, and he was immovable, and Gerald Hale understood for the first time that the cheap carpenter was not going to be cheap in the way that mattered. That night, Nate sat at his kitchen counter and did the math 3 times, to be sure he was not the one who was wrong. He was not. 40 hours. He had the little notebook where he wrote every hour in pencil, because a man who bills by the hour owes the truth by the hour. 40. The ledger had made it 90, and it had made it his. He thought about Walt's warning, and hated that Walt had been right, and hated more that being right about people gave Walt no pleasure either. He thought about signing. It would be so easy. $19,000 was a number he could not pay, and would spend 2 years pretending he could, and Gerald knew that, had priced the threat exactly to the size of Nate's life. That was the part that got under his skin. Not the theft, the precision of it. A man had sat down and calculated how much fear a carpenter could hold. Ivy's field trip form was on the table by the envelope, with the $22 already counted into it. He looked at the envelope for a while. Then he took out his phone, laid the ledger page flat under the lamp, and photographed every line. Slow, in focus, the way he did everything. He did not do it to save himself. That distinction turned out to matter. 2 days later, he was carrying trim through the back of the estate office when he found Frances Odell crying very quietly at her desk, the way people cry when they have gotten good at hiding it. Frances was the firm's bookkeeper, 55, and she had entered a lot of numbers in her life that she had not liked. She looked up, saw who it was, and something in her came loose. "You are the carpenter," she said. "The one on the overrun memo." "That is me. It is not you." Frances pressed a tissue to the corner of her eye. "I mean the overruns. They are not you. They go out under your name and they come back into an account that is not yours." She stopped, terrified of the sentence she had already started. "I have 2 grandchildren and I have no other job. Do you understand what I'm telling you and what it costs me to say it?" Nate crouched beside her desk so she did not have to look up at him. "I understand exactly," he said. "So here is what we are going to do. You are not going to be the one who gets hurt. I have the page already. You keep your head down, you keep your job, and when the time comes I will never have needed your name. You did not tell me anything. I am a nosy carpenter who reads ledgers left on tables." Frances stared at him. "Why would you protect me? You do not know me." "Because that is the whole job," Nate said, standing. "Fixing what other men break without breaking somebody else to do it." It was that same week that Vivian's problem came to a head. The family held one formal dinner a year at the lake house, and Gerald had decided this year's would end with an announcement that Vivian would marry into the Prescott shipping family, a merger dressed as a match, arranged over her head. She had 1 week to arrive with a fiancé of her own, or be handed one at the table. She asked Nate in the estate library, standing beside the half-restored table, because it was the only room in that house where she felt like herself. "It is insane," she said. "I know it is insane. But if I walk in engaged, on my own terms, the whole thing collapses, and I need—" She stopped. "I need it to be someone they cannot buy and cannot scare. That narrows the field to one man I know." Nate wiped hide glue off his hands with a rag and thought about it longer than she liked. "I will go," he said at last. "But I go as myself. No borrowed suit, no borrowed story, no pretending I summer anywhere. I am a carpenter with a daughter and a truck, and that is who sits down at your family's table. If your family cannot stand a working man in the seat, that is their supper to choke on, not mine. That is the condition." Vivian, who had expected him to negotiate for money or for nothing, felt her eyes sting for reasons she did not examine. "That is the whole condition," she said. "To be honest." "That is the whole condition," Nate said. "It is the only one I have ever been able to afford." She agreed, without understanding, that his condition would be the exact thing that saved her. The dinner was held in a dining room longer than Nate's entire apartment, under a chandelier that had cost more than his truck, his tools, and his shop combined. He wore his own good shirt, pressed, no tie, and he held Vivian's chair for her, and then took the seat beside her as if he belonged in it, which is a thing a man can do when he has decided who he is before he walks in. The table read him instantly, a carpenter. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Gerald opened the hunt over the soup. "And what is it you do exactly, Mr. Calloway?" He said the name like a coin he suspected was counterfeit. "I fix what other men break," Nate said, spreading his napkin. "Seems to be steady work in this family." Preston Hale, Gerald's son, 30 and soft in the way of men who have never been told no, laughed once, meanly. "Vivian, be serious. You brought the help to dinner and put a ring on it." "I brought the only honest man I have met in a year," Vivian said, "and I'm aware of how that reflects on the rest of you." A woman across the table, an aunt in good jewelry, tried to be kind in the way that is worse than cruelty. "And how did you two meet, Mr. Calloway? Something charming, I hope." "She hired me to save a table everyone else called firewood," Nate said. "We got to talking about wood. It is a good subject. It does not lie to you." "A table," Preston repeated, delighted. "You are a repairman." "I am." Nate buttered a roll without hurry. You would be surprised how much of a family turns out to need repair once you are inside the house. It landed softer than a raised voice and left a larger mark. Vivian looked at her plate to hide her face. Down the table an uncle coughed into his napkin, and it might have been a laugh. Gerald tried a different blade. He talked about the estate restoration, about disappointing overruns, about how one must watch tradesmen closely. He was building, in front of his whole family, the public case that Nate was a thief, so that no one would believe the carpenter later. It was clever. It was the move of a man who did not know a photograph existed. And then the truth arrived on its own, the way it does when a house is old enough. There was a sound in the hall, the soft electric hum of Ruth Hale's chair. Ruth was 79, the widow of the man who had built the fortune and the table both, and she was wheeled to dinner every year past the library on the way. This year the library door stood open, and inside it, under the good lamp, sat the partners' table. Finished that very afternoon, the burl top glowing, the crack gone as if it had never been, the veneer laid back down, board by board, across 100 Tuesdays. Ruth Hale made them stop the chair. She sat in the doorway and looked at her husband's table for a long, silent moment, while the whole dinner waited. Then she had herself wheeled to the head of the dining table, and her voice, when it came, cut cleaner than anything Gerald owned. "Who mended my husband's table?" Silence. Gerald opened his mouth to manage it. "It was firewood," Ruth said. "Over him, not to him. 3 men told me so. I signed the paper to have it hauled away. Someone stopped it. Someone spent a season of his life bringing back the one thing in this house I still speak to." Her eyes moved down the long table and stopped on the man in the pressed shirt with the careful hands. "You." "One joint at a time, ma'am," Nate said quietly. "It only ever needed somebody to think it was worth the Tuesdays." Ruth Hale looked at her grandson-in-law for a night, and then she looked at her son Gerald, who had called this man sloppy, and something very old and very sharp came into her face. That was the moment Vivian set the photographs on the table. She laid them out one at a time, calm now, the way you are calm once the worst part is behind you. The padded ledger, the phantom hours under Nate's name, and beside it, in Francis Odell's neat, true hand, the real book. The account numbers that led not to a carpenter but to a chairman. "These are the overruns, Uncle Gerald," Vivian said. "Every dollar you built onto an honest man's name. It goes back 9 years, not 9 weeks. Francis kept the real ledger the whole time, in case anyone ever cared to look. I care to look. The family board was, as family boards are, mostly at the table already. Ruth Hale did not wait for lawyers. She had buried the man who built all of this, and she had no patience left for the man dismantling it. All those in favor of removing Gerald from the chair and referring the accounts to counsel, she said, say it now, out loud, so he hears every voice. The count came 7-1. Gerald did not stay to hear it twice. He said a few things about ingratitude and lawyers, and about how none of them would last a year without him, and then he found that no one at the table was looking at him anymore, which is the one thing a man like Gerald cannot survive. His chair scraped back. His footsteps crossed the marble. Somewhere outside, car lights swept the long drive and were gone, and not one person in that bright room turned to watch them go. Nate did not gloat. It was not his to gloat over. He had come to dinner to keep a promise to a frightened woman, and he sat quietly while a family he was not part of took apart the man who had wronged him, and he felt mostly tired and mostly glad it was Francis who would sleep easy now, because that was the part he had done on purpose. When the room turned to ask how the fraud had been caught, Vivian answered before anyone could aim a single question at the bookkeeper. A ledger got left on a table, Vivian said smoothly, and a nosy carpenter can read. Down the table, Francis Odell pressed a napkin to her mouth and looked at Nate, and Nate looked back with the smallest shake of his head, which meant, "You are safe. I told you I would keep you safe." And he had. Later, in the study, Vivian found Francis shaking by the window and took both her hands. "You kept the real books all along," Vivian told her. "You did not lose anything tonight. You are running this office now, at your own number, and the first person you answer to is me. Thank you. It cost you more than anyone will ever know, and I know." Near midnight, Nate sat in his truck in the estate drive and did not start it. He had not wanted a war. He had wanted to be paid for 40 honest hours and left alone to raise his girl. He had gotten something bigger than that, and he was not sure yet whether bigger was the same as better. He called the sitter. He heard Ivy's sleepy voice come on the line, indignant at being awake. "Did you read the good part yet?" he asked her. "I saved it," Ivy said. "For you, you said." "I did say, save it one more night, I am coming home." "Was the dinner fancy?" Ivy asked, fighting sleep now. "Did they have the little forks?" "They had every fork a person could invent," Nate said. "I used 2 of them and left the rest to fend for themselves." Ivy laughed, a small warm sound down the line, and it did more to settle him than the whole night's vindication. "Did you ask about the library?" she said. "You promised." "I asked. The grandmother reads at the big table every single morning. She reads the books, Ivy. She keeps them and she reads them." He heard her satisfied hum. "Go to sleep, save the good part. I love you to the shop and back." "To the shop and back," she said, and was gone. He was still sitting there, phone dark in his hand, when Vivian came out and got into the passenger seat without asking, still in her deep-water gown, and pulled the door shut against the cold. For a while, neither of them said anything. The lake made its small sounds beyond the trees. "None of tonight was supposed to be true," Vivian said finally, looking straight ahead. "The ring, the 2 of us. It was a story I needed for 3 hours. You know that." "I know that," Nate said. "Some of it got true anyway." She said it very quietly, like a confession she was not sure she was allowed to make. "Some of it got true anyway," he agreed. He did not reach for her. He had learned that the good things, like good joints, hold better when you do not force them. He took the ring off his finger, but instead of setting it in her palm, he slipped it into his shirt pocket over the heart and left it there undecided, and she saw him do it, and neither of them said one word about what that meant. The Hales offered him the world in the morning, or their corner of it. They wanted to make him their in-house director of restoration, a title, a grand salary, an office in the stone house. The whole family suddenly warmed now that the accounting agreed with their conscience. Ruth Hale herself made the offer, which meant it was serious. Nate turned it down at the same library table he had saved, standing in his work clothes with his cap in his hands, polite as ever. "I am grateful, truly," he said. "But I do not need a chair at your table. I have got one at mine, and it is the right size for my life. I will take the estate work as a fair contract, my name, my hours, paid honest, and I will do it better than anyone you could hire to sit in an office. You are all welcome at my shop any Tuesday. That is the most of me anybody gets, and it is the best of me, too." Ruth Hale, who had spent 79 years watching people take every dollar and title she offered, looked at the carpenter who wanted only to be paid correctly and left whole, and she smiled for the first time in the story. "Your grandfather would have hated you," she told Vivian, nodding at Nate, "and then he would have hired you and hated that more." She paused at the door and turned the chair halfway back. "There is a room in this house full of books nobody has opened in 30 years, Mr. Calloway. When your girl is old enough, bring her. Tell her they are for reading, not for keeping. Tell her an old woman said so." Then she had herself wheeled out, satisfied in a way she could not name. Frances Odell walked Nate to his truck afterward. She had a new steadiness to her, the posture of a person who is no longer waiting to be caught at something she did not do. "I sleep now," she told him simply. "First time in 9 years. I wanted you to know it worked, what you did. Keeping my name out of it, it worked." She squeezed his forearm once, hard, and went back inside to the office that was hers now. A week after that, Vivian came to the shop instead of the house. She met Ivy properly, on Ivy's ground, which was the front room with the mended rocking chair. Ivy studied her with the frank cruelty of an 8-year-old and asked the only question that counted. "My dad says you know about the Lake House Library. Do rich people read the books or just keep them?" Vivian did not laugh, which was the correct choice, and Ivy noted it. "I read them," Vivian said seriously. "The good ones twice. There is a girl who lives in a castle. I think you are on the part where she finds the passage behind the shelf." Ivy's whole face changed. She turned to her father with the ancient triumph of a child whose test has been passed. "She said she reads them, twice," Ivy reported, as if Nate had not been standing right there. And then she took Vivian by the hand to show her the good part, and that was that. Ruth Hale reads at her husband's table now. In the window where the morning light comes across the burl top, she once signed away as firewood. If you turned the table over, which nobody ever will, you would find no brass plate, no donor's name, no record of the money that never actually saved it. You would find only a small maker's mark cut into the underside of the rail, the same mark Nate Calloway cuts into everything he finishes, a mark that says, without a single word, that a person stood here and cared enough to do it right. Across town, at the same morning hour, Ivy Calloway reads in her great-grandmother's rocking chair, the one that broke and came back. Vivian's coat hangs by the door now, as if it has always lived there, and no one has said the large words yet, and no one is in a hurry to, because some true things do not need announcing, only keeping. A ledger can measure what a man charges. It cannot measure what he keeps whole. 2 rooms, 2 tables, the same steady grain running through both, and a girl in each of them, reading the good part at last.